Long before written history, before philosophers, historians, and poets attempted to describe the world in rational terms, the ancient Greeks created stories to explain the mysteries of existence, stories that grew into a vast and interconnected system of myths that shaped their religion, their art, and their understanding of what it meant to be human. Greek mythology did not begin as a single organized religion with clear rules and doctrines, but rather as a collection of tales passed down through generations, changing and evolving as they traveled from village to village, from island to island, and from one storyteller to another. At the heart of these myths was a simple but powerful idea, that the universe itself was alive, filled with gods, spirits, and supernatural forces that influenced every part of human life, from the changing of the seasons to the outcome of wars and the personal struggles of ordinary people. The Greeks believed that the world had not always existed in its current form, and their myths about creation began with a concept known as chaos, not chaos in the modern sense of confusion, but rather a vast, empty void from which all things eventually emerged. From chaos came the first fundamental beings of existence, ancient and mysterious forces that represented the basic elements of the cosmos, including Gaia, the earth, Tartarus, the deep abyss beneath the world, Eros, the power of love and attraction, and Nyx, the embodiment of night. Gaia, the earth itself, became one of the most important figures in Greek mythology, for from her body came mountains, seas, forests, and eventually the first generation of divine beings, making her both the mother of the gods and the foundation of all life. According to myth, Gaia gave birth to Uranus, the sky, who stretched above her like a vast star-filled dome, and together they formed the first great cosmic pair, representing the union of earth and heavens that made creation possible. From the union of Gaia and Uranus came the Titans, a powerful race of primordial gods who ruled the universe long before the more familiar Olympian deities ever existed. And among these, Titans were figures who would shape the destiny of the world. The Titans included Oceanus, the god of the great river that surrounded the world, Hyperion, associated with light, Themis, the embodiment of divine law, Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, and Cronus, who would later play a central role in the dramatic struggles of the gods. But the family of Gaia and Uranus was not entirely harmonious, because alongside the Titans were born monstrous beings such as the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, terrifying creatures with 100 hands, and Uranus, disgusted by their appearance, imprisoned them deep within the earth. This cruel act filled Gaia with anger and sorrow, and she eventually convinced her Titan children to rebel against their father, an act that marked the first great conflict in the long history of the gods. Cronus, the youngest and most ambitious of the Titans, agreed to challenge Uranus, and with a weapon created by Gaia herself, he overthrew his father, separating the sky from the earth and taking control of the cosmos. With Uranus defeated, Cronus became the new ruler of the universe, and for a time, the Titans governed all existence, an era sometimes described as a golden age when the gods ruled without challenge. Yet power in Greek mythology was never stable, and Cronus soon learned a terrifying prophecy that would shape the rest of his story. He was told that one day he would be overthrown by his own child, just as he had overthrown his father. Fearing this fate, Cronus made a desperate decision, swallowing each of his children as soon as they were born in order to prevent them from ever challenging his rule, an act that horrified his wife Rhea and set the stage for the next great chapter of divine history. Rhea, unwilling to lose another child, secretly saved her youngest son Zeus by hiding him on the island of Crete and tricking Cronus into swallowing a stone wrapped in cloth instead, a deception that would change the destiny of the universe. As Zeus grew to adulthood in secret, he learned of his true identity and of the injustice committed against his siblings, and eventually he returned to challenge his father, beginning a new and even greater war among the gods. With the help of Gaia and other allies, Zeus forced Cronus to release the children he had swallowed, bringing back into existence Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, the future rulers of the Olympian order. Together, these younger gods waged a massive cosmic war against the Titans, a conflict known as the Titanomachy, which shook the foundations of the universe and determined who would rule the heavens, the seas, and the earth. After 10 long years of battle, Zeus and his siblings emerged victorious, imprisoning many of the Titans in the depths of Tartarus and establishing themselves as the new divine rulers of creation. From this victory arose the Olympian gods, named after Mount Olympus, the mythical home where they were believed to dwell, watching over humanity and shaping the fate of the world. Zeus became the supreme ruler of gods and men, lord of the sky and master of thunder, a figure of immense power whose decisions influenced every corner of existence. Poseidon, his brother, was given dominion over the seas, earthquakes, and storms, while Hades became the ruler of the underworld, the shadowy realm where the souls of the dead would dwell for eternity. Hera, sister and wife of Zeus, became queen of the gods and protector of marriage, though her relationship with Zeus would be marked by jealousy, conflict, and endless drama. Demeter became the goddess of agriculture and the seasons, responsible for the growth of crops and the cycle of life and death in nature, while Hestia ruled over the hearth and home, symbolizing stability and domestic peace. These 6 deities formed the core of the Olympian family, but they were soon joined by many others, including Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hermes, and Dionysus, each representing different aspects of the human experience. Unlike the distant and abstract gods of some other cultures, the Greek gods were imagined as intensely human in their personalities, filled with love, anger, jealousy, pride, and compassion, making them both powerful and deeply flawed. The Greeks did not see their gods as perfect beings beyond emotion, but rather as immortal reflections of humanity itself, magnified to cosmic proportions and capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty. Because of this, Greek mythology became not only a way to explain the natural world, but also a vast collection of stories about human nature, exploring themes of ambition, betrayal, heroism, passion, and fate. Central to Greek thought was the idea that even the gods were subject to certain universal forces, especially the power of fate, which was controlled by mysterious beings known as the Moirai, or the Fates. These 3 ancient sisters were believed to spin, measure, and cut the thread of every life, determining the destiny of mortals and immortals alike, reminding even Zeus that there were limits to his authority. Alongside the gods existed countless other supernatural beings, including nymphs, satyrs, monsters, and spirits of rivers, forests, and mountains, creating a world in which the divine and the natural were completely intertwined. Every aspect of existence had its own deity or spirit, from the rising of the sun to the blowing of the wind, from the blooming of flowers to the deepest fears of the human mind, and the myths served as a map to understand this invisible landscape. As Greek civilization developed, poets such as Homer and Hesiod began to organize these ancient tales into more structured narratives, giving shape to the complex family tree of the gods and preserving their stories for future generations. Homer's epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, presented the gods as active participants in human affairs, interfering in wars, guiding heroes, and punishing those who dared to challenge divine authority. Hesiod, in his work known as Theogony, attempted to explain the origins of the gods and the structure of the universe, creating one of the earliest systematic accounts of Greek mythological history. Through these writings, and many others, Greek mythology became more than just folklore. It became the foundation of Greek religion, philosophy, and culture, influencing everything from temple rituals to theater and sculpture. The myths were not simply entertaining stories, but deeply meaningful narratives that helped the Greeks understand concepts such as justice, honor, love, death, and the relationship between humans and the divine. Heroes such as Hercules, Perseus, Theseus, and Achilles emerged as central figures in these tales, standing between the world of gods and the world of mortals, demonstrating both the greatness and the limitations of human beings. Monsters like the Hydra, the Minotaur, and Medusa symbolized the dangers of chaos and the unknown, while quests and adventures represented the struggle to bring order, courage, and wisdom into a difficult world. Even the geography of Greece was filled with myth, as mountains, rivers, and islands were associated with specific deities and legendary events, turning the entire landscape into a living storybook. To the ancient Greeks, mythology was not something separate from reality, but rather a poetic way of describing the deeper truths of existence, truths that could not be captured by logic alone. Over time, as Greek culture spread across the Mediterranean and interacted with other civilizations, these myths blended with new ideas, influencing Roman religion and eventually becoming part of the shared heritage of Western civilization. Yet despite all the changes of history, the core stories of Greek mythology have remained powerful because they speak to universal human experiences, exploring questions about power, love, fear, destiny, and the search for meaning. And so, from the first emergence of chaos to the rise of the Olympian gods, Greek mythology created a vast and unforgettable vision of the universe, a vision filled with drama, beauty, and timeless insight into the nature of gods and men. This is only the beginning of that story, the foundation upon which countless legends, heroes, and adventures would be built, and in the next part, we will explore the great Olympian gods themselves, their personalities, their rivalries, and the roles they played in shaping the world of ancient Greece. With the defeat of the Titans and the rise of Zeus, the universe entered a new era, one ruled not by ancient and mysterious primordial forces, but by a younger generation of gods who were far more active, emotional, and involved in the everyday affairs of humanity, gods who would come to be known as the Olympians. Unlike the distant Titans, the Olympian gods were imagined by the Greeks as vivid personalities with distinct characters, desires, weaknesses, and rivalries. And it was through their stories that the ancient world explained nearly every aspect of life, from storms and harvests to love, war, and creativity. At the center of this divine family stood Zeus, the king of the gods, ruler of the sky, master of thunder and lightning, and ultimate authority on Mount Olympus, a figure both revered and feared for his immense power and unpredictable temper. Zeus was seen as the guardian of order and justice, the protector of guests and strangers, and the divine force who ensured that oaths were kept and laws respected. Yet he was also famous for his many love affairs and the complicated family conflicts that followed them. The Greeks imagined Zeus as a majestic and commanding figure, sitting upon a golden throne, holding a thunderbolt in his hand, watching over the world below and intervening whenever he felt the balance of fate required his attention. Beside him ruled Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, family, and childbirth, a proud and dignified deity whose primary role was to protect the sacred institution of marriage, even though her own relationship with Zeus was filled with jealousy and conflict. Hera's myths often revolve around her attempts to punish the many lovers of Zeus and the children born from those unions, stories that reveal both her fierce loyalty to tradition and the deep emotional struggles that even the gods were believed to experience. While Zeus commanded the sky, his brother Poseidon ruled the vast and unpredictable seas, carrying a mighty trident that could create storms, earthquakes, and tidal waves, and sailors across the Greek world prayed to him for safe passage and calm waters. Poseidon was imagined as proud, powerful, and quick to anger, a god whose moods changed as suddenly as the ocean itself, and many of the great sea monsters and maritime disasters of mythology were said to be the result of his wrath. The third brother, Hades, ruled over the underworld, the shadowy realm of the dead, a place neither evil nor cruel by Greek standards, but simply the inevitable destination of all mortal souls. Unlike the modern idea of hell, the Greek underworld was not primarily a place of punishment, but rather a silent kingdom where the spirits of the departed lived on in a dim and dreamlike existence, watched over by Hades and his queen, Persephone. Persephone's own story was one of the most important myths in Greek culture, explaining the changing of the seasons through her annual journey between the world above and the realm below, a cycle that brought both life and death to the earth. Demeter, mother of Persephone and goddess of agriculture, was responsible for the fertility of the land, and her grief at the loss of her daughter was said to cause winter, while her joy at Persephone's return brought spring and summer back to the world. Through Demeter, the Greeks expressed their deep dependence on nature and the fragile balance between growth and decay, abundance and famine, life and death, themes that lay at the heart of their understanding of existence. Another of Zeus's children, Athena, was one of the most respected and admired of all the Olympians, the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and just warfare, born fully grown and armored from the head of Zeus himself. Athena represented intelligence, discipline, and civilized order, and she was believed to guide heroes, inspire craftsmen, and protect the great city of Athens, which took its name in her honor. In contrast to Athena's calm and calculated nature stood Ares, the god of war in its most violent and chaotic form, a figure associated with bloodshed, rage, and the brutal realities of battle. While Athena symbolized the noble and strategic side of warfare, Ares embodied its destructive and uncontrollable power, and even the other gods often regarded him with suspicion and dislike. One of the most complex and beloved figures of Greek mythology was Apollo, god of the sun, music, poetry, prophecy, healing, and truth, a radiant and multifaceted deity who represented harmony and intellectual enlightenment. Apollo was believed to speak through the famous Oracle of Delphi, where priests and priestesses delivered cryptic prophecies that guided kings, generals, and ordinary people in their most important decisions. His twin sister Artemis ruled over the moon, the wilderness, and the hunt, a fiercely independent goddess who protected young women and guarded the natural world from those who would disrespect it. Artemis was often portrayed as distant and untouchable, preferring the company of forests and wild animals to the complicated emotions of gods and mortals, and her myths emphasized purity, freedom, and the power of nature. Among the most famous and influential of the Olympians was Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and desire, whose power was said to affect not only humans, but even the gods themselves. Aphrodite's myths are filled with passion, jealousy, and irresistible attraction, showing how the Greeks understood love as a force both creative and dangerous, capable of bringing joy and chaos in equal measure. Her marriage to Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, was one of the great ironies of mythology. For Hephaestus was hard-working and loyal, while Aphrodite was famous for her affair with Ares, a story that symbolized the tension between stability and passion. Hephaestus himself was a unique figure among the gods, a master blacksmith and inventor who created magnificent weapons and tools, yet who was also portrayed as physically imperfect, reminding the Greeks that creativity and intelligence were more valuable than outward beauty. Hermes, the clever and quick-witted messenger of the gods, played a different role, acting as the guide of travelers, merchants, and thieves, as well as the escort of souls to the underworld. With his winged sandals and playful personality, Hermes represented movement, communication, and the unpredictable nature of chance, and many myths describe his mischievous tricks and daring adventures. Finally, Dionysus, the youngest of the Olympians, brought an entirely different energy to Mount Olympus, for he was the god of wine, ecstasy, theater, and transformation, associated with celebration, madness, and the breaking of social boundaries. Through Dionysus, the Greeks explored the idea that human beings needed moments of release and emotional freedom, a reminder that life was not only about order and discipline, but also about joy, creativity, and mystery. Together, these gods formed a complex and often dysfunctional family, constantly arguing, competing, falling in love, and interfering in the lives of mortals, creating the endless drama that lies at the heart of Greek mythology. The Greeks did not imagine their gods as distant or perfect beings, but as powerful reflections of human nature, exaggerated versions of the same emotions and conflicts that shaped everyday life. Each city and region of Greece had its own favorite deities, temples, and local legends, and worship of the gods was woven into every aspect of public and private life, from grand festivals to simple household rituals. Sacrifices, prayers, athletic competitions, and theatrical performances were all offered in honor of the Olympians, who were believed to reward devotion and punish arrogance, especially the dangerous human sin known as hubris. Hubris, excessive pride or disrespect toward the gods, was considered one of the greatest dangers a person could face, and countless myths warned that those who boasted too loudly or challenged divine authority would eventually suffer terrible consequences. Stories of mortals such as Niobe, who dared to compare herself to the goddess Leto, or King Midas, whose greed brought him misery, served as moral lessons about the limits of human ambition and the need for humility before the divine. At the same time, the gods were not always just or fair, and many myths explore the suffering of innocent humans caught in the crossfire of divine rivalries, reminding audiences that the universe was not ruled by simple moral logic. Heroes such as Odysseus, Jason, and Perseus were forced to navigate a world where the favor or anger of a single god could change their fate, and success often depended on intelligence, courage, and a bit of luck rather than pure virtue. The Olympian gods were also deeply connected to the natural world, each representing forces that the Greeks experienced daily: the rising of the sun, the fertility of the earth, the danger of the sea, the unpredictability of love, and the inevitability of death. Through them, the Greeks found meaning in events that might otherwise have seemed random and terrifying, transforming storms, droughts, and personal misfortunes into parts of a larger cosmic story. Even emotions such as jealousy, passion, fear, and hope were personified as divine powers, suggesting that human feelings were not merely personal experiences, but universal forces that shaped the destiny of the world. Over time, as Greek civilization grew more philosophical and scientific, thinkers began to question the literal truth of these myths, yet the stories remained powerful symbols that continued to influence art, literature, and moral thought. Plays by dramatists such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides used the gods and heroes of mythology to explore deep ethical questions about justice, responsibility, and the fragile nature of human happiness. Sculptors carved magnificent statues of Zeus, Athena, and Apollo. Poets retold ancient legends in new forms, and entire cities defined themselves through their relationship to particular deities. Even when later philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle tried to move beyond mythological explanations, they still relied on the familiar language and imagery of the Olympians to communicate complex ideas. In this way, Greek mythology became more than a religion. It became a shared cultural language through which generations could discuss the most important questions of existence. The Olympian gods, with all their flaws and contradictions, offered a way to understand a world that was often beautiful, often cruel, and always unpredictable. They reminded the Greeks that life was a mixture of order and chaos, reason and passion, justice and randomness, and that human beings had to find their place within that delicate balance. And so, from the thunderbolts of Zeus to the songs of Apollo, from the wisdom of Athena to the storms of Poseidon, the Olympian gods formed a vast and colorful tapestry of stories that explained not only how the universe worked, but also what it meant to live within it. Yet the world of Greek mythology was not limited to the gods alone, for alongside them existed a vast realm of heroes, monsters, and legendary adventures. And in the next part, we will explore the extraordinary tales of those mortals who dared to challenge fate itself. While the Olympian gods ruled the heavens and shaped the destiny of the world, Greek mythology was not only a story about divine beings, but also about extraordinary mortals who dared to challenge impossible odds, confront terrifying monsters, and struggle against the power of fate itself. These mortals were known as heroes, and they occupied a unique place between gods and ordinary humans, possessing exceptional strength, courage, intelligence, or skill, yet still vulnerable to fear, suffering, and death. Unlike the gods, who were immortal and largely beyond human limitations, the heroes of Greek mythology lived and died, and it was precisely their mortality that made their stories so powerful and meaningful to ancient audiences. Greek heroes were not perfect figures of pure virtue, but complex characters filled with pride, doubt, passion, and flaws, and their adventures often served as lessons about the dangers of arrogance, the value of perseverance, and the unpredictable nature of destiny. One of the earliest and most famous of all Greek heroes was Hercules, known to the Romans as Hercules, a man of immense physical strength, who was said to be the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, making him a demigod with extraordinary abilities. Heracles' life was marked by both greatness and tragedy, for although he performed incredible feats, he was also driven to madness by the jealous goddess Hera, an act that led him to commit terrible deeds for which he would spend years seeking redemption. To atone for his actions, Heracles was commanded to complete 12 nearly impossible tasks, known as the 12 labors, each designed to test his strength, intelligence, and endurance beyond all human limits. Among these labors, he was required to slay the Nemean lion, a monstrous beast with an impenetrable hide, capture the golden hind of Artemis, defeat the many-headed Hydra, clean the vast stables of King Augeas in a single day, and descend into the underworld to capture the fearsome three-headed dog Cerberus. Through these challenges, Heracles became the ultimate symbol of perseverance and resilience, a hero who overcame impossible obstacles through determination and courage. And his myths taught the Greeks that even the greatest suffering could be transformed into glory. Another legendary hero was Perseus, the brave young man who was sent on a seemingly hopeless quest to defeat Medusa, the terrifying Gorgon, whose gaze could turn any living creature to stone. Armed with gifts from the gods, including a mirrored shield from Athena, winged sandals from Hermes, and a magical sword, Perseus traveled to the edge of the known world, cleverly using reflection rather than direct sight to behead the monster. His victory over Medusa became one of the most famous triumphs in all mythology, and from the blood of the slain creature sprang Pegasus, the winged horse that would carry Perseus on further adventures. Perseus's story also included the rescue of Andromeda, a princess chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster, a tale that combined heroism, romance, and divine intervention into a classic example of the mythological adventure. Theseus, the great hero of Athens, was another figure whose exploits captured the imagination of the Greek world, especially his journey into the labyrinth of Crete to confront the monstrous Minotaur. The Minotaur, a creature half man and half bull, lived in a vast maze designed by the brilliant inventor Daedalus, and each year, young Athenians were sent into the labyrinth as tribute to be devoured by the beast. With the help of Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, who gave him a thread to mark his path, Theseus entered the labyrinth, killed the Minotaur, and found his way back to freedom, becoming a symbol of intelligence and bravery, overcoming chaos and fear. Yet even Theseus, like many Greek heroes, was not free from tragedy, and later myths describe how he abandoned Ariadne and suffered personal misfortune, reminding audiences that heroism did not guarantee happiness. Perhaps the most celebrated hero of all was Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Trojan War, whose story was told in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, one of the foundational works of Western literature. Achilles was said to be nearly invincible, protected by his divine mother Thetis, who dipped him in the river Styx as a child, leaving only his heel vulnerable, a small weakness that would eventually lead to his downfall. His life embodied the Greek ideal of heroic glory, yet it also revealed the terrible cost of pride, anger, and the relentless pursuit of honor, themes that resonated deeply with Greek audiences who understood the fragile balance between greatness and ruin. The Trojan War itself was one of the central events of Greek mythology, a massive conflict fought over the abduction of Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, and filled with legendary figures such as Hector, Paris, Agamemnon, and Odysseus. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, became famous not for physical strength, but for his intelligence and cunning, qualities that allowed him to survive the long and dangerous journey home after the war, a journey described in Homer's Odyssey. During his travels, Odysseus encountered many of the most memorable monsters of Greek myth, including the Cyclops Polyphemus, the enchanting but deadly sirens, the sorceress Circe, and the terrifying sea creatures Scylla and Charybdis. Each of these encounters symbolized different dangers of the human experience: temptation, pride, deception, and the struggle to remain faithful to one's purpose in the face of overwhelming hardship. Monsters played a crucial role in Greek mythology because they represented the forces of chaos and fear that threatened human civilization, and defeating them was often a way for heroes to prove their worth and bring order to the world. Among the most fearsome of these creatures was the Hydra, a serpent-like beast with many heads that grew back whenever one was cut off, symbolizing problems that multiply when not confronted wisely. The Chimera, a terrifying hybrid of lion, goat, and serpent, breathed fire and terrorized entire regions until it was finally slain by the hero Bellerophon, who rode the winged horse Pegasus into battle. The Sphinx, with the body of a lion and the face of a woman, guarded the city of Thebes and challenged travelers with riddles, devouring those who could not answer correctly until the clever Oedipus finally solved her puzzle. Even nature itself was filled with supernatural dangers, as sailors feared the seductive songs of the sirens. Travelers avoided the lairs of giants and dragons, and entire regions were said to be haunted by spirits and monsters beyond human understanding. These stories were not merely entertainment, but reflections of real fears and challenges faced by ancient people. The dangers of the sea, the uncertainty of travel, the threat of wild animals, and the mysteries of the unknown world beyond their cities. Greek mythology also celebrated great quests, journeys undertaken not only for personal glory, but for the benefit of entire communities, the most famous of which was the voyage of Jason and the Argonauts. Jason's mission to retrieve the Golden Fleece took him and his band of heroes across the seas to distant and magical lands, where they faced impossible challenges, powerful sorceresses, and divine obstacles placed in their path by the gods themselves. The Golden Fleece symbolized kingship, authority, and divine favor, and the quest to obtain it represented the idea that true leadership required courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to confront the unknown. Many heroes were assisted or hindered by the gods, who constantly interfered in human affairs according to their own interests and rivalries, reminding mortals that they were never fully in control of their destinies. Athena often aided clever and disciplined heroes, while Poseidon punished those who offended him at sea, and Aphrodite or Eros might suddenly alter the course of events by inspiring love or jealousy at critical moments. Yet for all their divine assistance, Greek heroes were ultimately human, and their stories frequently ended in tragedy, because the Greeks believed that no one, not even the greatest champion, could escape the power of fate. This idea was powerfully expressed in the story of Oedipus, a man who tried desperately to avoid a terrible prophecy only to fulfill it through his very attempts to escape, demonstrating that destiny in Greek thought was unavoidable and often cruel. The theme of tragic fate appears again and again in Greek myth, reminding audiences that life was unpredictable and that even the strongest and wisest individuals were subject to forces beyond their control. Women, too, played important roles in heroic mythology, not only as prizes to be won or victims to be rescued, but as powerful figures in their own right, such as Atalanta, the swift-footed huntress, and Medea, the brilliant but dangerous sorceress. Medea's story, in particular, revealed the darker side of passion and revenge, showing how love, betrayal, and anger could transform even the most gifted individual into a figure of terrifying power. Through all these tales, the Greeks explored what it meant to be human in a world filled with danger, uncertainty, and divine influence, using heroes and monsters as symbols for the struggles that every person faced in their own life. Courage, loyalty, intelligence, humility, and respect for the gods were praised as the qualities most likely to bring success, while arrogance, greed, and disrespect were shown to lead inevitably to disaster. These myths were told and retold for centuries, shaping the values of Greek society and providing models of behavior for warriors, leaders, and ordinary citizens alike. Even as Greek culture changed and evolved, the stories of heroes and monsters remained central to education, theater, and art, appearing on vases, carved into temples, and performed on stage before vast audiences. To the Greeks, these were not merely fictional adventures, but deeply meaningful narratives that expressed fundamental truths about the human condition and the mysterious forces that governed the universe. And although the Age of Heroes was said to have ended long before historical times, their legends continued to inspire later generations, influencing Roman culture and eventually becoming part of the shared heritage of the entire Western world. In the next part of our journey through Greek mythology, we will move beyond the individual heroes and explore the great myths of love, tragedy, and transformation that revealed the emotional and psychological depth of the ancient Greek imagination. Beyond the battles of heroes and the thunderous rivalries of the gods, Greek mythology was also deeply concerned with the inner world of human emotion, with the fragile and often painful experiences of love, jealousy, grief, and longing. Many of the most enduring Greek myths are not tales of war or adventure, but intimate stories about relationships, about the ways in which passion can uplift the human spirit or destroy it completely, and about how even the gods were not immune to the power of the heart. One of the most famous of all these stories is the tragic romance of Orpheus and Eurydice, a myth that explores love, loss, and the limits of human hope. Orpheus was said to be the greatest musician who ever lived, a man whose songs could charm animals, move trees, and soften even the hardest of hearts, and his beloved wife Eurydice was the center of his world. But shortly after their marriage, Eurydice was bitten by a serpent and died, descending into the underworld, and Orpheus, unable to accept her loss, decided to attempt the impossible, to journey into the realm of the dead and bring her back. Armed only with his lyre and his voice, he traveled to the dark kingdom of Hades, where his music was so beautiful that it moved even the cold hearts of the rulers of the dead. Hades and Persephone agreed to release Eurydice on one condition: that Orpheus must walk back to the world above without looking behind him, trusting that she was following. But at the final moment, overwhelmed by doubt and fear, Orpheus turned to look, and Eurydice vanished forever, a heartbreaking reminder that some boundaries can never be crossed, no matter how strong love may be. Another myth that explores the fragile nature of love is the story of Eros and Psyche, a tale that reveals how trust and devotion can overcome even divine obstacles. Psyche was a mortal woman of extraordinary beauty, so beautiful that people began to worship her instead of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, who became furious with jealousy. Aphrodite sent her son Eros to make Psyche fall in love with a monster, but instead he fell in love with her himself, secretly becoming her husband on the condition that she must never look upon his true form. For a time, Psyche lived in happiness, but curiosity and the influence of her jealous sisters eventually led her to break her promise, causing Eros to abandon her in sorrow. Determined to win him back, Psyche undertook a series of impossible tasks set by Aphrodite, facing dangers and challenges that tested her courage, patience, and faith. In the end, her devotion was rewarded, and Zeus granted her immortality so that she could be reunited with Eros forever, a myth that symbolized the journey of the soul through suffering toward true and lasting love. Not all Greek love stories ended so happily, however, and many myths warned of the destructive power of uncontrolled passion. The tale of Phaedra and Hippolytus is one such tragedy, a story of forbidden desire and devastating consequences. Phaedra, the wife of the hero Theseus, fell hopelessly in love with her stepson Hippolytus after Aphrodite cursed her with uncontrollable longing. When Hippolytus rejected her advances in horror, Phaedra, overcome with shame and despair, falsely accused him of attempting to seduce her, leading Theseus to call upon Poseidon to punish his own son. Hippolytus was killed in a terrible accident, and Phaedra, consumed by guilt, took her own life, leaving behind a family destroyed by passion, lies, and the cruelty of the gods. The Greeks understood that love was not always gentle or kind, and many myths portray it as a force as dangerous as any monster or battlefield. This darker side of desire appears again in the story of Narcissus, a beautiful young man who was so proud of his own appearance that he rejected everyone who loved him. As punishment for his vanity, the gods caused him to fall in love with his own reflection in a pool of water, a love that could never be fulfilled. Unable to tear himself away from the image he adored, Narcissus slowly wasted away, transforming after death into the flower that still bears his name, a symbol of self-obsession and emotional blindness. Transformation was a central theme in many Greek myths, expressing the idea that powerful emotions could literally change a person's nature and destiny. One of the most haunting examples is the story of Daphne and Apollo, in which the god Apollo became desperately infatuated with a nymph who wanted nothing more than to remain free. As Apollo pursued her through the forests, Daphne prayed to be saved, and in the final moment, she was transformed into a laurel tree, escaping his grasp, but losing her human form forever. From that day on, Apollo wore a crown of laurel leaves in her memory, a bittersweet reminder that even the gods could not always possess what they desired. Another myth of transformation is that of Arachne, a talented mortal weaver who dared to challenge Athena to a contest of skill. Although Arachne's weaving was flawless, her arrogance angered the goddess, who transformed her into a spider, condemning her to weave for eternity. This story, like many others, served as a warning about the dangers of pride and the need to respect the boundaries between humans and gods. Perhaps no myth captures the tragedy of human emotion more powerfully than the story of Oedipus and his family, a tale that explores fate, guilt, and the painful search for truth. Oedipus was prophesied to kill his father and marry his mother, and despite every effort to avoid this destiny, he unknowingly fulfilled it, discovering the horrifying truth only after it was too late. His wife and mother Jocasta took her own life, and Oedipus blinded himself in despair, wandering the earth as a broken man, a living symbol of the inescapable power of fate. The Greeks were fascinated by this idea that even the best intentions could lead to disaster, that human beings were often trapped by forces they could not understand or control. Yet Greek mythology was not only about sorrow and loss, it also celebrated the beauty and tenderness of human connection. The myth of Baucis and Philemon tells of an elderly couple who welcomed disguised gods into their humble home and were rewarded for their kindness with a peaceful death together, transformed into two intertwined trees so they would never be separated. Their story reminded the Greeks that love could be gentle and enduring, not only passionate and destructive. Even the gods themselves experienced deep emotional struggles, as seen in the myth of Demeter and Persephone, a story not of romantic love, but of a mother's grief for her lost child. When Persephone was taken to the underworld, Demeter's sorrow caused the earth to wither and die, and only her eventual return brought life back to the world. This myth explained the changing seasons, but it also expressed a universal truth about the bond between parent and child and the pain of separation. Greek mythology also explored the complexities of friendship, loyalty, and betrayal. The story of Achilles and Patroclus, for example, showed how deep emotional bonds could drive men to both greatness and destruction. When Patroclus was killed in battle, Achilles' grief turned into unstoppable rage, leading him to return to war and seal his own tragic fate. In these myths, emotions were never simple. They were powerful forces that shaped destinies and changed the course of history. Even jealousy, one of the most destructive emotions, was given vivid expression in countless tales, especially in the stories of Hera, whose anger toward Zeus's lovers and children created endless suffering. Yet through all these stories, the Greeks sought to understand why people feel the way they do, why love can be both beautiful and painful, and why happiness is so often fragile and temporary. They believed that human life was filled with both joy and sorrow, and that wisdom came from accepting this balance rather than trying to escape it. The theme of transformation, so common in Greek myth, reflected this belief that suffering could change a person, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. Whether turned into trees, animals, stars, or constellations, the characters of these myths were reminders that nothing in life remains fixed forever. Even the gods themselves could be transformed by experience, learning humility, compassion, or regret through their interactions with mortals. In this way, Greek mythology became a vast exploration of the human heart, using stories of gods and heroes to express truths that were deeply psychological and emotional. These myths helped people understand their own fears and desires, giving shape and meaning to feelings that might otherwise have seemed overwhelming or confusing. And although the ancient Greeks lived in a world very different from our own, the emotions described in their myths remain instantly recognizable even today. Love, jealousy, grief, hope, pride, and despair are as real now as they were thousands of years ago. And this is why these stories have never lost their power. In the final part of our journey through Greek mythology, we will look at how these myths shaped Greek culture, religion, and philosophy, and how they continue to influence the modern world in ways we often do not even realize. By the time the great age of classical Greece reached its height, mythology was no longer only a collection of ancient stories told around fires and temples, but a living system of ideas that shaped almost every part of Greek civilization. The myths of gods, heroes, and monsters were woven into religion, politics, education, art, and philosophy, forming a shared cultural language that united city-states, which were otherwise often at war with one another. For the Greeks, mythology was not simply entertainment. It was a way of understanding the world and humanity's place within it, a bridge between the visible reality of everyday life and the invisible forces that seem to govern destiny. Every major city had its patron deity, and the identity of entire communities was built around these divine relationships. Athens honored Athena as its protector and symbol of wisdom. Sparta revered Ares and Artemis for strength and discipline. Delphi became sacred to Apollo, the god of prophecy. Olympia was dedicated to Zeus, king of the gods. Temples were built not merely as places of worship, but as expressions of civic pride and cultural identity, decorated with statues and carvings that depicted the most famous scenes from mythology. The Parthenon in Athens, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, and the massive sanctuary of Zeus at Olympia were not only religious sites, but monumental storytellers carved in stone. Through architecture and sculpture, myths became physical realities, visible reminders of the divine order that the Greeks believed surrounded them. Religion in ancient Greece was deeply connected to these stories. Rituals, sacrifices, and festivals were all designed to honor the gods described in myth and to maintain their favor. The Olympic Games, for example, were originally a religious festival dedicated to Zeus, where athletic competition was seen as a sacred act, reflecting the heroic ideals celebrated in myth. Dramatic theater, one of the greatest achievements of Greek culture, was also born directly out of mythology. Playwrights such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides took ancient legends and transformed them into powerful tragedies performed before thousands of citizens. Stories like Oedipus Rex, Antigone, and Medea used mythological characters to explore deep moral and philosophical questions. What is justice? Can humans escape fate? Is loyalty to family more important than loyalty to law? Through these plays, mythology became a tool for public debate and emotional reflection, helping Greek society confront its own fears and contradictions. Even comedy drew heavily on myth, with writers like Aristophanes using the gods and heroes to mock politics, philosophy, and social norms. In education, mythology served as the foundation of learning. Greek children grew up hearing the poems of Homer and Hesiod, memorizing stories of Achilles, Odysseus, and the Olympian gods as part of their basic understanding of the world. To be educated in ancient Greece meant to know the myths because they contained examples of courage, wisdom, arrogance, loyalty, and failure, lessons that were considered essential for moral development. Philosophy, which eventually challenged many traditional beliefs, also grew out of a world shaped by myth. Early Greek thinkers such as Thales, Heraclitus, and Anaximander began to search for rational explanations of nature, yet even they expressed their ideas using the familiar language of mythological imagery. Plato frequently referred to myths in his dialogues, using them as allegories to explain complex ideas about truth, the soul, and the structure of the universe. Aristotle analyzed Greek tragedies to understand human emotion and ethical behavior, proving that mythology remained central even to the most logical and scientific forms of Greek thought. As Greek culture spread through conquest and trade, especially under Alexander the Great, these myths traveled far beyond Greece itself. They reached Egypt, Persia, Asia Minor, and eventually Rome, where they were adopted and adapted into Roman religion. The Romans identified their own gods with the Greek deities. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Athena became Minerva, Ares became Mars, Aphrodite became Venus. Through Rome, Greek mythology became the foundation of much of Western culture, influencing literature, art, and religion for more than 2,000 years. Even after the rise of Christianity pushed the old pagan religions aside, the stories of Greek mythology never disappeared. Medieval scholars preserved them as part of classical education, and Renaissance artists rediscovered them with passion and enthusiasm. Painters such as Botticelli, Michelangelo, and Raphael filled their works with images of Venus, Apollo, and the heroic figures of ancient legend. Writers like Dante, Shakespeare, and Milton drew upon Greek myths to enrich their own creations, using familiar stories to express new ideas. During the Enlightenment and the modern era, mythology became a subject of serious academic study. Scholars began to analyze myths not as literal religious truth, but as symbolic expressions of psychological and cultural realities. Thinkers such as Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung saw in Greek myths reflections of the human subconscious. Oedipus became a symbol of hidden family tensions, Narcissus a metaphor for self-obsession, the heroic journey a pattern of personal growth. In this way, mythology continued to evolve, gaining new meanings in every generation. Today, the influence of Greek mythology is everywhere, even if we do not always notice it. The planets of our solar system carry the names of Greek and Roman gods. Psychological terms like narcissism, titanic, and Herculean come directly from myth. Companies, sports teams, and cities use mythological names and symbols to express strength, beauty, and identity. Modern literature and film are filled with echoes of ancient stories. Fantasy novels, superhero movies, and adventure epics often follow the same structures found in Greek myth: the reluctant hero, the dangerous quest, the wise mentor, the final confrontation with chaos. Characters like Superman, Wonder Woman, and countless others are modern versions of Hercules, Athena, and Perseus, updated for a new age, but built on the same ancient foundations. Even everyday language is filled with references to mythology. We speak of Achilles' heels, Pandora's boxes, Odysseys, and Trojan horses, without always remembering that these phrases come from stories told thousands of years ago. The continued power of Greek mythology lies in its deep understanding of human nature. The Greeks recognized that people are complicated, capable of both greatness and terrible mistakes, driven by emotions that are often beyond rational control. Their gods were not distant moral judges, but exaggerated mirrors of humanity, reflecting both our noblest qualities and our darkest impulses. Because of this, the myths feel timeless. They do not belong only to the ancient world. They belong to anyone who has ever loved, feared, hoped, or struggled. The story of Icarus warns us about reckless ambition. The tale of Odysseus teaches patience and endurance. The tragedy of Oedipus reminds us of the limits of human knowledge. The labors of Hercules show that redemption is possible even after terrible failure. These lessons remain just as meaningful in the modern world as they were in ancient Greece. Yet Greek mythology is more than a collection of moral lessons. It is also a celebration of imagination itself.
It shows how human beings have always tried to understand the unknown by turning it into story.
Before science explained the stars, the Greeks imagined them as gods and heroes placed in the sky. Before psychology analyzed emotion, myths gave those emotions faces and names. In this sense, mythology was humanity's first great attempt to make sense of existence. And although modern knowledge has replaced many ancient explanations, the need for stories has never disappeared. We still search for meaning, still tell tales of heroes and villains, still wonder about destiny, love, and the mysteries of life. Greek mythology endures because it speaks to these universal needs. It reminds us that every culture, no matter how advanced, begins with imagination. It reminds us that questions about life and death, fate and freedom, have always been part of the human experience. And it reminds us that long before history books and scientific theories, people tried to understand the world through the power of narrative. From the birth of the cosmos out of chaos, to the rise of Zeus and the Olympians, to the adventures of heroes and the tragedies of mortal love, Greek mythology forms one of the richest and most influential story systems ever created. It shaped an entire civilization, inspired some of the greatest works of art and literature in history, and continues to echo through modern culture in countless visible and invisible ways. Even today, when we read these ancient myths, we recognize ourselves in them. We see our own fears in the monsters, our own dreams in the heroes, our own emotions in the flawed and passionate gods. That is why Greek mythology has never truly died. It lives on whenever a new story is told, whenever a new hero rises, whenever people search for meaning in a confusing and unpredictable world. And so, thousands of years after these tales were first spoken, the voices of the ancient Greeks are still with us, reminding us that storytelling is one of the most powerful forces humanity has ever known. This concludes our journey through Greek mythology, a vast universe of imagination, wisdom, tragedy, and wonder that continues to shape the way we see the world and ourselves.